The closure of Hong Kong International Airport has put the city's protest movement in the spotlight once again. The airport was forced to cancel all remaining passenger flights on Monday, more than 100 after thousands of demonstrators flooded into the main terminal during the afternoon. The disruption will be felt worldwide, with cancellations including long-haul departures to the US, Australia and the UK. Monday's closure is the biggest blow struck on the third occasion that the protests have crossed the water to the airport. Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Associate at the International Global Dialogue, joins us now on Skype. Sanusha, very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us. So, China has warned that these anti-government protests are the first signs of terrorism and has called for severe punishment of perpetrators. What do you take this to mean?
Good evening to you and thank you for the invitation. I think this now signals for Beijing and in particular for the Chinese authorities is that they need to take more decisive action. And with the statement coming up often that they now see this as the first stirring, the first signs of act of terrorism, suggests to me that they're going to basically try and up the ante on their end in terms of how their security cluster will deal with the kinds of the nature of the protests, the fact that the protests have become violent in some ways and form. And so their response would be, how do we deal with that violence? How do we actually quell the situation?
So do you foresee, as some Hong Kong legal experts have suggested, this meaning that there will be the extensive use of anti-terror laws, meaning a major crackdown on the demonstrators?
Well, essentially that's what it is. I mean, the idea up until now was to enable and allow the authorities within Hong Kong, in particular Carrie Lam's administration, to be able to address and stabilize the island order. The city of Hong Kong, and in particular their police force, was seen as the last sign of defense. But unfortunately, what has happened in the last several weeks, and of course this weekend, with the culmination of possible planes being diverted, not flying into Hong Kong, and a sense of slowness and bringing things to a standstill, indicates to me that this is where they're going to be going. We know that there's been a video, a kind of training program video that says the capability of how the Chinese security forces will deal with the kind of riots, etc., try to maintain sustain law and order. But up until now, Beijing has been very cautious about that approach because of the implications it will have, both in terms of the signaling of the message, but also in terms of the economic structure and the economic attractiveness of the island. So I think right now we're dealing with that situation.
So Sanusha, I want to refer to those videos. So apparently they've emerged of armoured personnel carriers driving towards Shenzhen, and the fact that we've seen the PLA remain in the barracks and it's been left to the Hong Kong police to deal with the situation. Was that the strategy all along, that they're seen as to have exhausted Hong Kong's measures of dealing with the rioters and then coming in to play hardline?
Well, I think that's part of the strategy. The strategy was really to let the administration in Hong Kong to be able to deal with it in order to suppress and to bring the protests under control. And I think that necessarily did not pan out as the way in which Beijing wanted it to do. So now we're seeing these other tactics come up with the videos around the capabilities of the PLA, etc., and whether or not how are they trained to deal with these kinds of protests, which has become violent in certain ways and forms, where a lot of the shops had to close their doors. People were actually asked to leave the shop because they were scared of the impact that this would have. So we kind of enter a sense of where there's still strife that's bordering on the safety and security of citizens and civilians. So I think in that way, what you're going to see is how much those preparations, those videos that were released, is going to come into effect in terms of how do you deal with this situation. I still think that Beijing would want some kind of internal dynamic between the administration of Hong Kong and the protesters to come to some kind of resolution and dialogue.
So, Sanusha, in terms of the wider geopolitics, how do you see this playing out? On the one hand, there's been an admission that Hong Kong is facing its worst crisis since it was returned back from British rule. But at the same time, you have China pointing a finger at the US and the UK complaining of what it sees as interference.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've raised these points. I've listened to several other platforms where these issues were discussed. And there seems to be a sense that because of the way in which protests are organized, the logistics and the kinds of logistics that are going into this, there's this accusation that there's an hand from outside, what they call a black foreign hand coming in and essentially orchestrating and directing and supporting it through financial and non-financial means. Now, this makes Beijing very nervous, because it also means that Beijing considers this to be an internal dynamic, an internal affair. It doesn't necessarily want outside interference or even outside presence in this issue. But at the end of the day, I think what we're going to have is Beijing has to make a decision about how it's going to go about addressing this. Because apart from this political turmoil, the challenge is also that raising the specter of all kinds of ways to intervene, but that doesn't bode well for the market. There's been decisions, or there's been certain levels of hesitancy emerging from investors to say that now that the die has been cast, what is to say it won't happen again?
Senior Research Associate at the International Global Dialogue, Sanusha Naidu, speaking to